Every time I would, get up, I'd go down to a meal, and I would just make it back to my room before I, conked out. I know now, again, it was the Blessed Mother taking care of me, and I know it in part because one afternoon when this happened, I'm falling asleep, taking a nap in the middle of the afternoon. I say, this is really stupid. I'll force myself awake. I'll force myself to get up and do something. So I force myself up to 45 degrees in bed to wake up, and I kind of lift my head, and I try to wake up, and bang, I'm out cold again, and I fall into this dream. And in this dream, it's taking place in a service station, right? And there's a car up on the lift, and there are 3 mechanics working on each of the 4 wheels of the car, and there's a shop steward directing the work, right? And the shop steward is the Blessed Virgin Mary. I'm the car on the lift. The car is trying to get down off the lift, and Mary is yelling at the car, "What are you doing? Can't you see they're not finished yet?" So, this was a picture, obviously, of what was going on. And then when I left La Salette to go back to the United States, obviously my ski trip was ruined by being stuck at La Salette. This is how I looked at it. And the night before leaving, I was in Geneva waiting for the flight out the next day, and I went to sleep. And I went to sleep with a prayer that was really just a whining complaint to God, saying, I can't believe you did this to me. How can you do this to me? I go halfway around the world to go skiing. It's a nonstop blizzard for 10 days. It would have been the best skiing conditions of my life, and you stick me at La Salette. How can you do this to me? And I go to sleep with that prayer on my mind, and I have this dream, again, a very waking feeling dream, and I'm confronted with this man who looks at me very seriously. He reminded me of like that, really loving high school teacher who always seemed very serious and somber, but who the kids really knew was the one who really loved them more than anybody else. And he just drills me with his eyes, and he says, you can go skiing or you can work for the second coming. It's your choice. Which do you choose? So, anyway, I felt about 3 inches tall. I think I know what choice I made, which is kind of why I find Let me go back to one aspect of my witness testimony, which I think it may be worth talking a little bit about, which is I mentioned how when I was confronted, found myself face-to-face with God, so to speak, in that initial experience, my response was essentially, I want to spend my life serving you and worshiping you. Let me know what religion this is. And I said, anything but Christ, as long as it's not Christianity. So let me talk a little bit about where that resistance to Christianity comes from. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about how to evangelize Jewish friends or something. But where that Jewish resistance, I can talk about where that resistance to Christianity came from in me. And where it came from in me is that deep down inside, I knew Jesus. I mean, in other words, I remember that before I could speak, when I was, I started speaking very late. I know that might be hard to believe now. But I was 4 before I began to speak. Before I could speak, I was totally enthralled, for instance, by the Christmas spirit, and would feel the presence of Jesus around Christmas celebrations, around Christmas carols, not in my house, obviously, but in school and so forth, and, around Christmas trees and Christmas creches. I think that's one of the reasons why the Jewish community is so dead set against public displays of Christmas, is because on some level they know that Jesus works through it, and that people feel the presence of Christ through it. The first sentence that my family remembers me saying, and for which they still tease me, is, I want a Christmas tree. And I would repeat it endlessly, only I couldn't pronounce Christmas tree, so it came out bibabee. So I would just say over and over again, I want a bibabee, I want a bibabee. And that was knowing Jesus before I knew better than to know him, so to speak. When I was very small, I remember we had a medicine cabinet in the kitchen, and we had St. Joseph's aspirin for children. Now, I didn't know who St. Joseph was. This is true, all I can say. I didn't know who St. Joseph was. I didn't know what a saint was. But when I was really distraught and felt no one understood me or loved me, I would open the medicine cabinet, push the stool over to it, stand on it, and talk to the St. Joseph's aspirin bottle. So I think that, I'll tell one other story because I want to encourage you to do this. Obviously, my parents had babysitters, when I was very small, and at one point we had this elderly, now I know she was a Catholic woman, babysitter. I used to hate it when she came because we had to sit through Lawrence Welk show. Which isn't really something, a 4-year-old really likes. But one evening, she taught us the Hail Mary. I remember she taught me the Hail Mary. And my parents came home, and of course I'm this 4-year-old kid, right? So what do? You're so proud of what you learned. So as soon as they come in the door, it's like, Mommy, Daddy, let me show you what I learned, Hail Mary, full of grace. And of course my parents just got frozen, and they got livid. And they started shouting at her, How can you do that? We're Jewish. And she just said, it's the Hail Mary. Everybody has to know the Hail Mary. So, God knows where the grace of my conversion came from, but I'm sure all of these things matter and all of these things are important. So anyway, I certainly encourage all of those kinds of things. And so my basic thrust is, I think that the heart of the virulent Jewish refusal to accept evangelization, to even accept hearing the name of Jesus. And there's some stories in Honey from the Rock where when a child comes home from school, and asks his Jewish parents, what's this about Jesus? Why don't we believe in Jesus? The answer is, we don't say that name in this house. Or, I don't want to hear that name in that house. Forget it. In other words, a total refusal. And I think the strength of that refusal is because he's knocking at their hearts. And they know on some level the truth of Christianity. And it's the deepest longing of the human heart, and it's more than one can bear to think that it exists and it's possible and you don't have it. And I think it's out of that pain and out of that kind of sour grapes that refusal to hear comes. I'll tell a personal story, and it's in the context of an invitation for prayer, but my parents were dead set against my conversion. I'll tell that aspect of things. Some people have asked me privately. They've asked, how did your parents respond when you first became Catholic? My initial answer is they were fine for the first 3 years because I didn't tell them. And the reason I didn't tell them was partly cowardice and partly because I wanted them to see the change in me. Because I knew that if I told them, they'd think I had gone crazy. But I wanted them to see that I had become more loving and more kind and more responsible, and then tell them. And I did, and they agreed. They actually said, we think you went crazy, but in some strange way that made you more loving and more responsible and more kind. But then they got very, very upset when they realized they weren't going to be able to bully me out of it, especially my father. And he said the standard things, I wish my son were dead, I have no son, I never want to hear his name again, and so forth. He relented after about 6 months, and things are better now. They're actually better than they ever were. My mother was a little bit less violent in her response, but she was very upset. But then a few years later, I was walking with my mother alone in the woods, and it was kind of a very relaxed setting. There's a lot of miracle story around how this happened. I'll actually tell it. Has anyone heard of Anna Maria Schmidt? No? 1, 2 people. Anyway, a charismatic, a wonderful charismatic lay woman who gives retreats and conferences and so forth, had told me, I had gone to her for spiritual direction, she had told me, the next time you see your mother, what you have to do is hug her and tell her, I love you, which I had never done in my life, and my mother, frankly, had never told me she loved me either. And but Anna Maria Schmidt had told me this, and I had a great deal of respect for her charismatic gifts. And my mother was coming up to my house alone without my father by the train, because my father wouldn't step foot in my house because I had all these pictures of Jesus and Mary and statues. And the one time he came, he got really upset, and I said, but what's the problem? They're all Jewish. But he didn't get it. So my mother came up once without him, and I'm waiting for her on the train platform, and she comes out of the train, and I say, okay, this is the moment. I have to throw my arms around her and hug her and tell her I love her. Okay, she's coming down the steps. She's coming across the platform. I have to do it now. I have to do it now. I couldn't do it. I just said, hi, Mom, get in the car. So I drive her to my house, and I just know that was the moment. The moment had passed. I couldn't bring myself to do it. What am I going to do? It's a hot summer day, and I excuse myself to take a shower in the middle of the day because I'm hot and sweaty and I want to go back outside with her. So I go to the bathroom,